practice owner, there is nothing more stressful than dealing with a toxic team member, a surprise resignation from a top producer, or the lingering fear of an HR compliance audit. A provider may spend years learning how to deliver the perfect clinical result, but also almost no time learning how to manage the people who make those results possible. Welcome back to the Business of Aesthetics podcast. I'm your host, Don Adeesha, and to help us build a bulletproof team, we are joined by Kara Kelly. Kara is the CEO of Clinical HR and a nationally recognized fractional HR business partner specifically for medical practices. With top-tier HR certifications and expertise in behavioral frameworks like DISC, she is the behind-the-scenes brain that healthcare executives call to fix broken cultures, restructure compensation packages, and ensure legal compliance. Today, we are discussing the dangers of W-2 versus 1099 trap, how to structure a modern total compensation package, and the HR playbook for surviving a practice acquisition. This episode is brought to you by Echo Marketing, the digital growth partner behind this podcast and a trusted resource for aesthetic practices looking to dominate their local markets. Kara, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Don. Honored to be here. I'm excited about today.
Wonderful. Let's get right into the conversation. So, Kara, as a fractional HR business partner, you step into clinics where the owner is often a brilliant clinician but a reluctant manager. When a provider first attempts to transition into that CEO role, what is the most common HR or leadership blind spot that immediately damages team morale, and how do you go about correcting it?
Yes, that's a fun question because honestly, there are so many. Like you said, the providers are the ones that have spent so many years perfecting their craft. They've got years of education, years of building up their own client space, and their own client roster, and they aren't always prepared. First of all, from the culture side, and then the other side is the compliance, of course. I always preface this by saying I'm not an attorney, I don't give legal advice, but I have been working with HR from the HR side of practices since 2012. And so I've got, a decade and a half or so at this point of background of working with med spas and aesthetics practices. And actually, one of the very first clients I ever worked with was a med spa, way, way, way back in 2012. And so this is a fun conversation, and I've seen a lot. But to your question, I do think that compliance is definitely one of the areas that they have a major blind spot, and it's just because of lack of awareness. You've run businesses, you understand. The IRS and Department of Labor, they don't take ignorance as an excuse whenever somebody makes a mistake, unfortunately. But it's one of those things that you're not going to go and learn that most places. You don't learn that whenever you're getting your license or medical degree or certification or whatever it is that you are doing in your aesthetics world. But that's something it's not going to matter whenever it comes time for audit. And so I think that being one of the areas, just because of, like I said, lack of awareness. The other is the leadership side. I think a lot of clinicians and practitioners are amazing with their patients or with their clients. They're not always great at leading their team because there's a huge difference in building a relationship with a client than versus building a relationship with a team member and being responsible for payroll and making sure they show up on time. And it just creates a whole other layer there of complexity. More people, more problems, right?
How does that relate? Making sure your team shows up on time. How does, your leadership behavior affect that? I mean, they sign up for it, right? Why do I have to do anything about that?
Oh, because people are human and they're messy and they're sticky and they've got personal lives and things and traffic and, all of the excuses that we hear, right? Um,
Mhm.
a lot of it comes, I think, from setting a standard. This is the expectation here. We expect you to arrive X number of minutes prior to your first scheduled client. If you're a clinician that's still working in your business, if you're not, working with like multi levels of leadership there, the people who are boots on the ground, whoever's supposed to be the leader of that practice, the office manager, whatever you call them in your business, needs to be the person that sets that standard and enforces that standard. I hear a lot of providers that complain, well, I want my team to be here at this time, but they're the ones rolling in, 3 minutes after the first client has arrived with their Starbucks in hand, and they're just not setting an example or a standard. And I get it. It's your business. You can run it however you want. But if you don't set that expectation, then it's going to end up running itself and running right over you.
Hmm. Now, clinicians are trained to be perfectionists, which often make them terrible delegators. How do you help an owner let go of controlling the front desk or perhaps even the marketing without feeling like they are compromising their brand standard of care?
One of my favorite books is Traction by Gino Wickman. And there's a tool in that book called Elevate and Delegate. What are the things that only you can do, and what are things that you can get off your plate and let someone else do, or the things that you don't really like doing? They may be perfectionists, but it doesn't mean they're good at everything. And once you're working with your clients, you may not have the time to devote to make everything 100% perfect all the time. Past that, you have to have some level of trust and some level of delegation in that business once you get past that solopreneur owner operator standpoint, because you're back with the clients, you're back doing accounting, you're back running payroll. There's other things that you're doing, having conversations with marketing companies, and with attorneys and whoever else you've got to deal with. Somebody's got to answer the phone, somebody's got to talk to the clients that come through the door, someone has to help process payments. You have to have some level of ability to let a little bit of it go. And I understand this. I'm a recovering perfectionist myself. I too, even in my own business, have some trouble letting things go occasionally, but I do have an assistant and I have her help me with things like contracts and emails and outreach and follow-ups and the things that I know that I'm not great at. And it really just took me admitting to myself that I am not good at this. I have a time blindness problem where somebody, inquired about working with me and they said maybe not right this second. They're not quite ready for it yet, but they want to in the future. And somehow 6 months went by between the time that I talked to them or not. And so I understand the need for systems and delegating that to somebody who is much better at it than I am. And so I work with doctors to help shift that mindset, or providers or practitioners to help shift that mindset and help them realize that this is not helping their business grow if they can't let go of some of those
Mhm.
things.
There we go. Now, in a market with severe staffing shortages, owners are desperate and often hire purely based on clinical experience rather than cultural fit. Um, you're an expert in everything disc. So, how should an aesthetic practice integrate behavioral profiling into their interview process to spot a high performing toxic personality before they ever even offer them a contract?
I don't even bring disc in at this point. Sometimes this is
Okay.
more a matter of setting up your interview process properly. Um, like you said, we're in a hiring shortage, and that's really across the board. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We have certainly changed since the pandemic of 2020. We've had a lot of shifts in the way that we work in general. We've also had a lot of changes when it comes to supply and demand of the workforce. There was a lot of people that phased out at that time, a lot of people that decided to retire early. And so we had a little bit of a shortage then. We've also, I think, just especially over the last year or so, with potential looming recession and some economic discomfort that we're feeling right now, I think that there are a lot of clients that are not wanting to open their wallets as much, and so we may not have as much revenue coming in, and it may just be harder to compete in this market. So overall, we have some issues that are contributing to the fact that we have a little bit of a staffing shortage. I don't know that that's necessarily going to get any easier is the problem. So what we're looking at is being competitive as an employer, but also making sure that we're hiring 100% the right people, which isn't always going to be possible. We'd love to. We'd love to have this, completely foolproof hiring policy where we always get the right person all the time. And that's really, it's not necessarily something that we can accomplish, even though we can certainly strive for it. So when I'm working with a practice on their hiring policies, we do set up a structure of, what are we looking for when it comes to resumes and experience with this person. Sometimes we have some unreasonable expectations where we'd love to hire someone with less experience because they have less of that, this is the way we've always done it over at this other company mentality. They want to be able to train them, but then they don't build in the time to train or coach or mentor. Sometimes we get somebody who's vastly experienced, but we don't build in the systems to say, hey, this is the way we're doing this here, or we don't really vet them to make sure it is a good culture fit. And there's certainly ways to go about doing that. Some of the practices that I've worked with will do something called a working interview. I don't love that for several reasons, because you basically hired somebody. And so there's a whole lot of compliance issue there. There's a whole lot of liability there. I do, however, definitely appreciate a practice that works with a skills assessment and that really is looking for soft skills as well as the technical. maybe running through a mock phone call with somebody who's supposed to be answering phones at the desk, and give them a script and show them how you want it done. Can they follow that script? If you make a change, do they trip up on that? If you've got another employee call in, or a friend or whoever call in to be a new patient or a new client, is that something that they're going to, fumble over? And it's okay if it's not perfect. It's how do they recover? We really diagnose what we're actually looking for there. Same with like whatever your management software is. If you're working with your management software and they say they have experience, is there a way that you can test that? Set up your training account, redact any information. Of course, you don't want to share your client information, but is there a way that you can test that and give them, maybe a 20-minute skills assessment and see how they handle things? See if they don't know how to do something, what do they do? Do they Google it? Do they turn around and ask you for help? Do they try to ask other team members? How do they get that information? And there may not be a right or wrong answer. The goal isn't for them to do it 100% perfectly. It's to see what happens under stress. It's to see what happens when somebody throws a wrench into the system. How do they handle that? So I think if we start testing for those things before we give them that contract, that could really help with that finding a perfect cultural fit or a better cultural fit for the practice that we're trying to create.
Carrie, you mentioned your take on working interviews. Can you help me differentiate when does a working interview cross that compliance border?
If they're doing any productive work, if somebody is paying your business for them to do that work, that's a working interview, at which point they should be paid as an employee, or depending on what your structure is, and what person you're hiring, but they should be paid for that work if they're actually working with a client. And like I said, there's many reasons I don't love that structure. One of them is that wage an hour. Sometimes they will have them come in for a full day and they've not gotten them on payroll. They don't have them on a specific agreement. They may say, oh, we'll give you a couple $100 at the end of the day, but you're missing a lot of forms. You're missing a lot of tax issues. You're missing your I-9. If they're going to be an actual W-2 employee, they need to have an I-9. And if you haven't provided that, even if you hire them, say the following week, well, technically that clock started when they actually started performing the work. Because they were actually replacing an employee and doing work that an employee would be doing. And so they kind of were. You also have your liability issues. Like I said, if they injure a client or a client injures them, you've got workers' comp to deal with if the client injures them and they may not cover it. You have your general liability. And if you tell your general liability that you brought in somebody who you didn't actually hire to work on one of your clients and they got injured, that might be a problem as well. HIPAA applying in some cases, that can be an issue. There's just a lot of different problems with that, and even some of the lower level things that you wouldn't expect. If you're hiring for an administrative position, somebody who's a receptionist or answering phones or a patient care coordinator, whatever you call it in your business, somebody who's answering phones. If you've got somebody who's a potential client for your business, do you really want them to have someone who doesn't know the business answer the phone when they call? I don't. I want somebody trained. So why would we do that? So outside of the compliance, there's just more reasons why you don't want to conduct working interviews in that manner.
Gotcha. Now, let's talk about legal risk, right? The regulatory landscape in aesthetics is shifting rapidly, and misclassification is a massive trap. Why are so many practices still illegally classifying their injectors and estheticians as 1099 independent contractors? And what is the specific financial or legal penalty an owner faces when the Department of Labor knocks on their door?
So worker classification is actually under IRS. And I'll reiterate, I'm not an attorney, I'm not giving legal advice. And so when we use the word legal, I always just like to make sure that that's very clear here. I did spend about 7.5 years or so working at a CPA firm that dealt with medical and dental practices. And so I actually have experience with a misclassification audit. We've had clients that have gotten that, letter from the IRS that said, hey, we have gotten word that you've misclassified or we're randomly auditing. And so it takes about a year and a whole lot of paperwork, or at least it did at that time. Right now, who knows how long it would take at this point. But it does take a whole lot of paperwork to deal with that. So it's definitely something worth getting right the first time if you can. The easiest way for me to explain this is that if they are doing the business of the business, they should be a W-2 employee. So if you are a med spa or an aesthetics practice and they are coming in and they're injecting and they're doing things, providing services and facials and treatments and things that anybody else in the business would be doing, because that's what you're selling to the client, that's somebody who should be a W-2 employee. Now, when it gets to the independent contractor side, it's possible, but usually that's somebody who is a specialist or maybe somebody who is filling in as kind of a per diem type provider. If they've got their own business doing that somewhere else and maybe they're just filling in for you for the day or filling in for one of your other providers for the day, that could potentially be a 1099 contractor situation. Or like I said, if they're doing something incredibly specialty, like if they've got their own equipment and they're bringing their own supplies and they're bringing their own team and they're handling that side of things, got their own liability insurance, that may be an independent contractor potentially. But just like with other types of classification, it's a lot safer for you if you have them as a W-2 employee when they could be a contractor versus having them as a contractor when they should be a W-2 employee. You ask about what the penalty for that is. The practice that I worked with I think we worked with them in 2018 or 19, they had misclassified 13 of their providers. This was a 5-location, it was a dental practice, but 5-location dental practice, and they misclassified 13 of their dental associates as independent contractors. And they had contracts, they had things that were signed. Some of these contractors had S corps, and they still got dinged by the IRS as having misclassified. And the penalty for that year was 142,000 just from the IRS, and that's before the state even got involved because those two talk. Because what they're looking at, even if the independent contractor had paid taxes, it looks like you're trying to avoid paying those payroll taxes. And so they will come after you, or they have, at least in the cases that I've seen, come after the business for the full amount of what taxes were owed, even if the provider paid taxes on their 1099 income. It's IRS, they want their money. And so it was a very, very expensive 1 year. And if you decide to push back and argue, they can open that up to the 4 years that they're able to audit. And so that 142 could have very easily been $500,000 or higher. If they decided to push back. And so we ended up, with that forgiveness grace period that they were able to get that taken care of and just kind of contain it to that 1 year. But it's definitely something worth getting done right. Like I said, for the most part, most of your team members are going to be W-2 employees. If you have, for example, someone who's doing marketing for you, who's coming in and capturing content, and that's their business, is to capture content, and they go around to other businesses and they provide the videos and they're working on their own schedule with their own equipment, and are, doing it from their perspective of that's their business and you're hiring them for that, that person can be an independent contractor. I'm an independent contractor when I work with practices. I do fractional HR. I, create employee handbooks. I do total compensation analysis. I do leadership coaching and things of that nature. All of that's a 1099 contractor because I'm not HR for your business, and you are not in the business of providing HR. So that's kind of, like I said, the difference of, are they doing the business for the business?
There we go. Thank you very much for that clarification. Now, if a listener is, tuning in and they are realizing right now that they're operating illegally with 1099s, what is the exact first step to transition those providers to W-2s without triggering a staff panic or an unexpected drop in their take-home pay?
Go talk to your CPA. Talk to your CPA because they're potentially going to have to file if you're going to be switching for things that you've already been doing. They may have to go back and refile reports and things like that. But it's definitely something, I'm happy to chat with you about it, but it's something that you want to go talk to your CPA about. You can also file an SS8 with IRS, and that will give the determination if there's a question of whether or not somebody is a 1099 contractor versus a W-2 employee. That Form SS8 can help you determine that. When we talk about classification, though, there's actually a second level of classification once you get to the employee side, and that's exempt versus non-exempt under Fair Labor Standards Act, which is what you were talking about when you said Department of Labor. Department of Labor manages that, and usually at your state level, but there is your exempt versus non-exempt that you also want to look at. And that's the other big area that I see when it comes to misclassification is I will see businesses that are just going to salary everybody and they don't want to keep timesheets. They're just going to put everybody on salary. And you can't actually do that because you do have a number of team members that are going to be considered non-exempt from FLSA, Fair Labor Standards Act. And that, just for background, is that federal law means it applies to everybody in every state, regardless of your headcount. Federal law that says that you have to pay employees at least minimum wage, and you have to pay them time and a half when they work more than 40 hours. I don't know too many providers that are working over 40 hours. And some providers actually do qualify as exempt under this rule. But if you're looking at assistants, for example, if you're looking at your administrative team members, most of them are not going to qualify for exemption from FLSA. And most of them need to be on a timesheet, keeping a timesheet, and need to be paid overtime if they do work more than 40 hours in a week, or if you're in one of the states that has a daily rate, pay attention to that as well. So that's the other area that I see, is that we're just going to say everybody is salary or everybody's commission only, and they may not actually qualify for that. So if they're working more than 40 hours, you really want to balance the compliance side with the actual practical, how do we pay people side.
There we go. So, Kara, this has been incredible, insightful, and I want to dive into the commission trap right after this. But before we continue, a quick message from our sponsor, Echo Marketing. Echo Marketing are offering our listeners a complimentary 60-minute digital strategy session. This is a one-on-one consultation with a senior strategist to help you map your 12-month high-value patient acquisition roadmap. You will get a personal diagnosis of your online presence and patient funnel, uncover untapped growth levers across SEO and social, and walk away with a clear, actionable plan tailored just for your practice. You can check the availability and reserve your spot in under 2 minutes at businessofesthetics.org/MSM. That's one word, businessofesthetics.org/MSM. All right, Kara, let's jump right back in. Now, the aesthetic industry has traditionally leaned on the eat what you kill, base plus heavy commission model. However, you advocate for a total compensation approach to improve retention and avoid legal fee splitting issues. Now, how does a practice owner safely transition their existing team away from heavy commission structure without causing a mass exodus of their top producers?
I mean, I still think that you can have a commission structure, but you said the key word, a base plus commission structure. I think a lot of businesses nowadays, if they're looking at it as commission only, you are losing out. First of all, you run into a compliance issue, like I mentioned earlier, potentially. But you're also losing out on being able to say, hey, I want y'all to come in for a team meeting. Well, your commission only people don't want to come in for a team meeting. They're not getting paid for that day. Or you're losing out on being able to offer mandated sick leave if you're in a state that requires it. That's a problem. You have to figure out what that daily rate is. And so if you have a base plus commission structure, you can say for our sick leave, it's base only. If you want to do paid holidays, you say it's that base. That's only base. It doesn't have to be a significant. It has to at least hit minimum wage. But I would say, that having some kind of a base plus commission structure is actually a really great way to manage this. But looking at it, like you said, from a holistic standpoint, a total reward standpoint, what are the things that I can offer that other businesses are not? If you're really trying to compete for talent in your area, what are some things that you can do that make this a business worth working for? That make you somebody that they would choose you over another organization, another clinic, another business period, whether it's in your industry or not. And so I like to look at it from that perspective, and I like to leverage base and say, okay, when we're factoring out what our commission is, what are some other things that we can add? Are we able to add paid time off and paid holidays? Like I said, your state's going to require it in some cases for your W-2 employees. And again, this is why sometimes people will misclassify as 1099 contractors. As we mentioned earlier, they're trying to avoid that, and they're going to get in trouble with it, but they're trying. But you can go ahead and meet that obligation for mandated sick leave if your state or if your city requires it. Some cities do where the state does not, which is where it gets all kinds of fun and complex on my side. It's good times. I love it. But that's something I think that can be something you can compete with. And that's where, if you're looking to bring in talent and you can say, we offer, 401k and paid holidays and paid sick leave, and we're not going to just throw you to the wolves and say, if you don't earn it, you're not getting paid. We're going to take care of you because you're our team and we do care about you and we all want to be successful together. And we don't want you coming to work sick. We don't want you to feel like you're, having to go temp somewhere else on a holiday because you need the paycheck. Or that you can't take any time off whatsoever. We want to make sure that you're taken care of because we care about our team and we all want to grow together. I think that's brilliant. And if you are a practice that offers that, if your business brings some kind of next level compensation to your team members, I think that's one of the things that really needs to be highlighted whenever you're trying to find team members. We talked earlier about there's definitely a shortage of team members, and one of the things I always recommend is working with your marketing company. You just mentioned there's a sponsor that's a marketing company. I think working with your marketing company is a fantastic way to really highlight that, to where you're not just throwing it at the bottom of a 16 paragraph job post. right? And you've all seen the posts on Indeed. The benefits are like way at the bottom. And so they skip through all of that. Have a link to a video that you've worked with your marketing company to create that really showcases what the culture, what the benefits are of working for your spa or your clinic. Make it something that they can visibly see. Because especially nowadays with the younger generations coming into the workforce that were all trained on Instagram and TikTok reels, our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. I say the younger generation, it's everybody at this point. Our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter because we get our information in 90-second reels. So what can you provide in 90-second reels that showcases what you offer those team members and why they should come work for you? I think that's something that you should really do your best to build out and highlight. And especially if you're doing something even first year, that's one of the things I see that businesses that are just starting to offer something, they'll say, well, they can't get any vacation for the first year. Well, first of all, if you got a sick leave mandate, that's not going to work. Second of all, a year is a very long time to work without any PTO. And so if you're somebody who does provide this, after 90 days or immediately upon hire, make that a big deal because it is in some cases, but
Absolutely.
total
And
rewards.
are there any times where you completely customize the package for that talent? Or, I mean, perhaps not completely, but take into some kind of specific considerations when it comes to the talent and, their capabilities itself.
You do want to try to be as across the board as you possibly can, because you can end up, into some discrimination issues if you are kind of picking and choosing. What you want to do is provide the same benefit for similarly situated employees. So your high level providers, your nurse practitioners or your doctors, if you have doctors working in the practice, they may be on a different compensation package. You may have individual contracts with them, but for maybe your administrative team, maybe for your assisting teams, on the clinical side, have something that's an across the board at different level packages. I know I worked with a plastic surgery practice a couple of years ago, and we had a 4-tiered system. And we didn't say 1, 2, 3 or anything like that. We actually color coded that with colors in their employee handbooks so that it wasn't as obvious what they were getting. But we had different levels of paid time off for them, different levels of bonus structure and other things that went according to what level they were on based on what they were providing as value to the business.
Okay. Now, the aesthetic industry is seeing a massive wave of private equity roll-ups and practice acquisitions. He specializes in cultural integration during the buyer side acquisitions. When a practice is brought out or merges with another clinic, what is the exact HR playbook to merge two completely different staff cultures without losing the key providers that made the practice valuable in the first place?
That is always really difficult. My number one tip for that is having a change agent, somebody who understands both cultures to help merge. That's one of the roles that I will tend to play with acquisitions when I work with a practice that is acquiring, because, like you said, they may have completely different cultures, and a lot of times the business that's being purchased is one that is either failing because the operator didn't really know how to run it as a business and it's failing. And so they may have been too stressed to really focus too much on culture. They may have had a lot of turnover. Or it's the other side where they were very successful for a very long time and they're just, retiring out. And the team members have been there for 5, 10 plus years. And it's hard for them to make that culture shift into what they're going to see as corporate. Right. And I'm sure, as you know, if you've done anything in M&A, that you want to make sure that they feel like they're not losing anything as best you possibly can, and that they feel like they're not just being taken over by corporate. I'm sure you've worked with this where somebody purchases the business and all of a sudden the team just bails. Like the fact that the team stays is one of the big benefits, that goodwill asset of purchasing a existing practice. In some cases, I've seen some hybrids lately where they purchased basically a hollow practice and there was no team. But that's fewer and far between. Usually there are at least a few existing team members. And so making sure that you understand both cultures, I think, is the first step to that before you start integrating. If you step in on day one and here's our 60-page employee handbook and all this paperwork that you have to do, and here's your new boss, and we're going to do things this way because that's the way we've always done it, versus saying, okay, these are the things we have to do from a compliance standpoint. Everybody here has been 1099 contractors. We really need to convert them to W-2. Or everybody here has been on salary. We really need to start having them keep timesheets. What are the base level compliance changes we need to make? And then over the first 3 to 6 month period, start integrating the culture. again, to the best we possibly can. A lot of this is going to depend on things like location. If you're purchasing a practice, maybe your headquarters is in one state and this other location is in another state, you may have some additional things you have to look at there. When it comes to culture, because culture are benefits, and like we just talked about, sometimes benefits are mandated. Sometimes benefits can't transfer. So, for example, if you've got a business in a state that doesn't have like a state level disability insurance and you purchase a practice in one that does, now you've got a benefit that those team members were receiving that it's per the state. The state takes the tax out for that. Like that's something you are going to have to offer those team members, but you can't offer everybody else because they don't live in that state. So you have to figure out how you're going to balance those benefits as well based on what's required or what they're going to be able to get because they live where they live if you're dealing with multi-state versus just multi-location in the same state. So a huge headache there. You want to have somebody who understands all of those sides of things before you just go in and say, here's what we're doing. I know I've worked with some nationwide practices that have, 20 plus locations in a dozen or more states. And some of them will say things like, well, we have a practice in California. California is the hardest state to work in. And so if we're doing everybody toward what California is doing, then everybody's on the same page and it's fine. No, it's not. You definitely want to make sure that you've got the compliance side right. You also want to make sure you have the compensation structure right because different markets are going to have different needs for compensation, different needs for different services. And so you want to make sure that you're balancing that as well for those team members. But like I said, I would start by what are the hills we have to die on? What are the things we absolutely have to do because we get in trouble if we don't versus the things that we can introduce later while we're trying to streamline things. And like you said, there's a playbook, but there's no hard, fast, here's the exact thing you do every single time because every one of them is going to be a little different. Are you acquiring this business and providing, your own branding? Is the corporation going to be the main brand over this? Or are you trying to keep that, small, unique boutique brand feel by keeping the brand that was already there and trying to integrate that? You have to look at those types of things as well. So just really a lot to consider, but definitely want to make sure that the team does not feel like they're losing anything and that you pick your battles and start with the things that you have to do and integrate the rest at the appropriate time.
Now, the appropriate time to integrate the culture. I was wondering how. How are you integrating the culture so that it's not, it's taken well by the existing team?
If you are trying to take your corporate overarching culture and integrate that into the existing team versus trying to keep the culture that was already there 100%, that is something, like I said, start off by picking your battles. What's the most important aspect? Not even from the compliance standpoint. What's the most important aspect of the culture? Is it the benefit shift? Were they getting a significantly higher commission than what you would typically offer? Okay, let's look at that. How do we restructure that? And when you're actually talking about the bones of how to do that, it's going to be a lot of conversations. It's going to be a lot of empathy and understanding. Like I said, my one rule is make sure they don't feel like they're losing anything. So maybe if we have to lower compensation from a certain perspective because this is how corporate does it, what is something else that we can offer? Are we able to, use the flexibility that corporate offers? Because hey, we've got more providers in the area that can fill in. So yeah, maybe you're getting a lower commission, but you're also able to be more flexible. Or maybe we're offering paid time off where they didn't have it before. What are those benefits that we can balance? And so sometimes that's going to be just genuinely multiple conversations that you have with individuals that are there. A lot of that it's communication. Communication solves a lot of problems, and it can also prevent them in these cases.
Right. Uh, Kara, I was also just wondering with regards to now, you mentioned benefits sometimes they can't transfer over, right? And on uh, more than one occasion, you mentioned the importance of balance and flexibility instead of completely just saying outright, okay, this benefit doesn't transfer over. I'm just wondering, is transparency a big how big of a role does transparency really play in, getting the culture right, getting the acquisition right, the transition smoothened out, and then of course with regards to this balance, um, how much of a balance are we really trying to achieve? Is there any moment where we will have to say we're sorry? It, it's not going to be the way it was, or is there always a bit of leeway?
There are certainly moments where we say this is the way that we do things here. Um, as, I like to say balance. I like to see that we have balance because I think when you're too far to one side versus the other, that's when people leave. And whenever there is an acquisition, oftentimes they're not told until the very last minute. Sometimes they're told after it happens. It kind of depends on what the situation is. I work with acquisitions where it's maybe a provider that has been working in the practice for a couple of years purchases the practice, and they're not scared about that. They tend to stay versus corporate coming in with PE money, like you mentioned earlier, coming in and saying, we're going to purchase this business. All of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, what is happening? I have a new boss. What all of these new rules and all of these new things that I have to learn. This is not fun anymore. And they start looking for other jobs. And that's what you're trying to avoid. And so there has to be some level of it. But there are certainly times where we have to say, look, this is the way that we operate. Maybe our hours are going to be a little different because we have found that this works better. Maybe our supplies have to be a little different because, one of the benefits of having a corporate structure is that buying power, right? They can get certain discounts using certain companies or certain products. And so maybe that's something that hey, we're going to have to start, shifting to this product. And maybe there's a transition period on that. That would be the balance. If we absolutely want them to use this set of products versus the products that they were using, maybe we have both of them for a period of time and then slowly phase out the ones that we aren't going to have as good of a deal on. Things like that, that can be a yes, we're going to do it and we're going to do it our way. We're just going to maybe integrate that. And that's where your balance comes from. It's not that you don't get your way. It may be that we're using a certain marketing company, or maybe they weren't doing certain things before. I've had some businesses, that the team members have been there a long time and they were there before the social media era became such a big deal for aesthetics practices. When it comes to marketing, and maybe they don't really love being on video or they don't want to do it. And that's just something they're going to have to do. And so that again is where you have these conversations and you say, this is the why behind it. This is why we're doing what we're doing. This is to help you. This is to benefit the business. We all win whenever we have clients coming through the door regularly and our schedules are full. And so this is why we want you to do this. And this is how we're going to do it. And this is how we're going to help you do it, but it's going to get done. You can have those
Right.
conversations.
And you should. Actually, when should you have those conversations now that you mentioned it?
As soon as possible. Like I said, there are some times, and there's very good reason behind it, why team members are not told about an acquisition until the very last minute. The reason is the deal can totally fall apart if they get nervous and they decide to start looking for another job, and by the time it's closing day, you don't have a team left. That it really can completely fall apart. And so there's definitely some times for that, but I would always say that if they're going to do it, make sure that they have a team meeting during that first day if you can. First week, most definitely. I see a lot of acquisitions where they're like, I'm going to show up on Monday and meet my team and we're going to somehow jump in here. And maybe the new owner is going to shadow for a day or two and then all of a sudden they're the boss. I've seen it handled very poorly. I had one in the last couple of years where it was a smaller practice being bought by just another individual, but they had never met the team. And they call me on a Friday and say, hey, I closed on a business yesterday. I'm going to meet the team on Sunday. The owners decided to call the team for dinner on Sunday to introduce me, and we're going to start working on Monday, and he's leaving on Tuesday. I'm like, oh my goodness, no. So I'm like, have they ever had a dinner together on a Sunday? She's like, I don't think so. Okay, well, that's going to be a huge red flag. Good times. So we worked out exactly like, what are we going to do with this? What are things you have to do? It was Friday afternoon. So I'm like, well, you need to XYZ right this second when it comes to like getting payroll set up. And these are the things that they're going to need to bring on Monday morning. Here's a list of that for you, but let's try to gently ease in. But that was not the best way to communicate to the team who didn't even know that their boss was retiring, that there was going to be a new boss come Monday morning. And so things like that, having those conversations as early as possible and making space for this, I think is one of the better ways.
Mhm.
Yes, it means a loss of production. That's always the biggest thing. I just bought this business and all of a sudden I have to take a whole day off to bond with the team. Oh, it's a loss of production and I've got to pay them to be there. I know it sucks and it's part of making the transition successful.
So, Kara, we have arrived at the end of the podcast here. I would like for you to give our listeners one last final golden nugget, key takeaway from this conversation. What would it be?
The communication of our expectations is probably one of the most useful tools that we can have in a business. One of the very first things that I learned from one of my very first leadership mentors is what I now call my HR ETA. Make your expectations clear, give them the tools, time, and training to do the job, and hold them accountable. And that first one, that making your expectations clear, can sometimes be the most difficult when we are stuck in provider mindset, when we're stuck in the clinician mindset. It's sometimes hard for us to break down the things that we want them to do because we're just so used to doing them ourselves. We have to stop and slow down and piece by piece everything out. There's different ways that you can communicate with your team. Job descriptions, employee handbooks. That's one of my favorite ways to make sure that everyone's on the same page. And then there's less of those questions about, well, can I take time off here? Or can I do this there? Or what should I do with this benefit? It's already there. It's in writing. We're all on the same page whenever we have those expectations clearly communicated in a document that says this is the way we do things here. And so that would be my biggest top takeaway for somebody who is struggling with leadership and who is maybe thinking of starting a business, buying a business. You really want to have some communication on paper as best you possibly can, because that helps things move forward smoothly.
Kara, this has been an absolute masterclass in HR and practice management. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
You are welcome. Thank you so much for inviting me. This was so much fun.
Kara, this was such a valuable conversation, and I think many practice owners listening probably had a few light bulb moments today. Because building a successful aesthetic practice is not just about great treatments, great results, or even great marketing. At some point, the practice rises or falls based on the people inside it. Whether it is dealing with a difficult team member, navigating W-2 versus 1,099 issues, creating a compensation plan that keeps good people, or going through an acquisition without losing your culture, HR cannot be something owners only think about when there's a problem. What I really appreciated from Kara today is that it starts with simple but powerful foundations, clear expectations, the right tools, proper training, and consistent accountability. That is how owners move from reacting to people problems to truly leading their teams with confidence. If Kara's approach resonated with you, I highly recommend connecting with her and learning more about her work at Clinical HR, where she helps medical and aesthetic practices build stronger teams, cleaner systems, and healthier cultures. And before we close, if you are looking for more clarity on the digital growth side of your practice, Equa Marketing is offering our listeners a complimentary 60-minute strategy session. It is a one-on-one conversation to help you see where your practice is today, where the growth opportunities are, and what a realistic 1-2 month plan could look like for attracting more high-value patients. You can reserve your session at businessofesthetics.org/MSM. I'm Don Adeesha, and this has been the Business of Aesthetics podcast. Thanks for listening. Keep on leading.